decide the type of person you want to be, and then you prove it to yourself with small wins. And the more small wins, or the more small habits that you perform, the more votes that you cast for that identity, the more you build up evidence of being that kind of person. And eventually you start to take pride in that aspect of your identity. And man, once we start to take pride in a part of our story, like it's much easier to stick with those habits. If you take pride in the size of your biceps, you'll like never skip arm day at the gym. Or if you take pride in how your hair looks, you have this like long hair care routine, all these hair care habits, and you do them every day. Whatever aspect of your identity that you're trying to reinforce, it rather than saying, I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts, you could have this question that's related to the identity you want to build, and you kind of carry it around with you all day. And like in this example, maybe the question is, what would a healthy person do? And so you're just kind of walking around all day asking yourself, what should I get for lunch? Well, what would a healthy person do? Or should I take an Uber? Or should I walk to the next meeting? Well, what would a healthy person do? And you just kind of like go around your day and try to make decisions that you feel like support that identity.
Need motivation?
Watch your top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because I need it. I need it for me because I don't wake up every day and say, yes, let's go conquer the world. No, I wake up and I need that external motivation to match my internal motivation. When I see somebody who's doing amazing things, it makes me just want to play a bigger game. And so I hope that today's video makes you want to play a bigger game too, because your message matters, and let's get it out to the world. So today, let's learn from one of the best, James Clear, and my take on his top 10 rules for success. Enjoy.
I think you start with, who is the type of person I wish to become? So let's say I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And then the second step is prove it to yourself with small wins. So which small actions, what little habits cast votes for being the kind of person who doesn't miss workouts? Well, maybe one thing is, rather than doing a 45-minute workout when I only have 10 minutes, I reduce the scope but stick to the schedule, and I do a couple sprints, or I do, 5 sets of push-ups or whatever it is. And so you find ways to reinforce your desired identity, even if it's small, especially in the beginning. Because if you can show up consistently, if you kind of master the art of showing up and performing these small habits, you build up this sense of momentum. You kind of start to reinforce and shape that new identity. And the more evidence that you have for it, at some point you kind of cross this invisible threshold where you're like, oh, I guess I am that kind of person. Like if you go out and shoot a basketball for 5 minutes, you don't think, oh, I'm a basketball player. But if you do it every day for 6 months or a year or 2 years, like at some point you cross this invisible line and you're like, I guess playing basketball is kind of part of who I am. So I think you're trying to accumulate actions that support your desired identity.
Rule number 2 is get 1% better every day.
Your concept of getting 1% better is much more believable for most people. And so just address that for a second. Why 1% better every day, and how does a habit do that?
Sure. So first of all, I think there's no reason that you can't be really ambitious, right? Like I consider myself to be a very ambitious person. I think it's just that you're oscillating or switching between these two modes. Like when you're in planning mode, when you're in strategy mode, sure, you can be very ambitious and be very aggressive and, stretching yourself and reaching. But when it comes time to take action and execute, you have to scale it down to something that you can achieve that day. Like in one sense, the biggest unit of time you could ever do something is about a single day, because then you got to go to sleep, and then you have to wake up again and do it the next day. So unless you're playing, at some point there's a limit. You can only stay up for 48 hours or 72 hours, and then you break. So that's the largest possible unit that you could ever do a single thing in. And I think more realistically, most of the time, the truth is, you got about an hour, or maybe you got 2 hours to work on this, and then you got to go move on to something else. So we don't have big chunks of time available to us. We need to scale things down into pieces that we can actually work on and execute. So the way that I think about it is, when making plans, think big. When making progress, think small. And getting 1% better each day is a way to encourage that. Excellence, a lot of the time, maybe we can even say most of the time, is not actually about radical change. It's about a commitment to accruing small improvements day in and day out. Secondly, and I think this is also crucial, it encourages you to focus on trajectory rather than position. Right? There's a lot of discussion about position in life. how much money is in the bank account? What is the number on the scale? What is the current stock price? What are the quarterly earnings? There's all this measurement around our current position. But what getting 1% better each day encourages is to focus on your trajectory instead. Am I getting better? Is the arrow pointed up and to the right, or have we flatlined? Am I getting 1% better or 1% worse? Because if you're on a good trajectory, all you need is time, right? If you have good habits, time becomes your ally. You just need to let time work for you. But if you have bad habits, time becomes your enemy. And every day that clicks by, you kind of dig the hole a little bit deeper. And so it's very much at the core, it's about encouraging you to focus on trajectory rather than position.
Rule number 3 is learn to prioritize.
How do you remove ambiguity from your world to keep that clarity of intention and purpose behind what you do?
I don't know that I have a good answer to how to live a life with clarity, but some of the things that I try to do include not doing too many things. So if you're optimizing for too many things at once, it's very hard to remain clear. You just have too many, irons in the fire. There's too much going on. And so that is easy to do when you're choosing between a good use of time and a bad use of time. It becomes harder to do, and I think it becomes increasingly true as you get deeper and deeper into your career. It becomes harder to do when you're choosing between good uses of time and great uses of time. In a sense, the most dangerous things on your to-do list, the things that are most likely to remove clarity and cause confusion and introduce a sense of overwhelm, are items like 3 through 5 on your priority list, because you have a good story for why you're doing those things. That's why they're on the list to begin with. And smart people are so good at coming up with like valid excuses or developing stories that sound really reasonable. So you'll look at that list and you'll be like, oh, well, I need to do this. Like, this is number 3, I have it on the list for a reason. This is a good way to spend time. I'll be productive. But the truth is items 3 through 5 are actually the greatest distraction to doing items 1 and 2. Because you can convince yourself that you're being productive while still avoiding the highest leverage work. So not taking on too many projects, I think, is a really crucial part of it. Obviously, there's sort of a connecting point there, like a pre-step, which is you need to know what you're optimizing for. You need to know what is the most important thing. And that requires a little bit of self-reflection.
Rule number 4 is break bad habits.
If you want to break a bad habit, there are kind of 3 potential paths you could take. So the first is you can eliminate it entirely. So elimination. Second option is you can reduce it. So you could like curtail it to the desired degree. I don't want to never drink caffeine. I just want to drink less of it. And the third option is you could substitute it. You could replace it with a different habit. And of those 3, oftentimes replacing it is actually the more effective option. So for example, if you get your caffeine from drinking Coke or soda or something like that, then maybe you find out, hey, something I really love from this experience is I actually just like drinking a carbonated beverage. And so it's the carbonation that I like. And maybe if I substitute it with sparkling water or something like that, I still get the carbonation sensation, but I don't have the caffeine associated with it anymore. And so that's a way of substituting for that behavior, and you still get something that the experience provides. This is actually kind of an important, just like larger picture, big picture thing about habits, which is every habit that you have, we build habits to solve the repeated problems that we face in life. And I'm using problems in a very general sense here. Like let's say that you come home from work and you feel tired and exhausted from a long day. Well, in a sense, coming home from work at 6 p.m. and feeling tired is a problem. And especially if you experience it repeatedly, you got to come up with some kind of solution for that. And generally speaking, we just kind of like try things out in life. And so you can imagine one person solves the problem of feeling exhausted by scrolling Instagram mindlessly for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And another person solves that problem by playing video games for an hour. And a third person solves it by going for a run for, 20 minutes. And those are all solutions to the same kind of underlying problem, but some of them are more healthy or more productive or serve us better than others. And what do you think the odds are that the solutions you've come up with to the repeated problems in your life are the optimal one? Like, it's just so unlikely that whatever you happen to have stumbled into throughout life is the perfect way or the best habit that serves you most. So I think what I'm trying to get at there is maybe take a little bit of the pressure off yourself and don't worry about judging yourself so much. You're just trying to solve the repeated problems that you face. But once you realize that it's unlikely that your current solutions are the optimal solutions, well, now maybe we can step outside and above ourselves and look down and try to come up with a better solution. So rather than drinking a Coke to get the carbonation, we can drink sparkling water. So that's one example for the substitution. If we want to take the other path of reduction, something I've noticed about myself is if I get a 6-pack of beer and I put it in the front of the fridge, like in the door or on a shelf that's like right at eye level, I'll drink one every night just because it's there. But if I take it and put it on the lowest shelf in the fridge and like it's kind of all the way back in the corner, I can't really see it unless I'm bending down, it'll sit there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And so I'm like, did I want it or not? Like if it was obvious, then I grab one. But if it wasn't, then I avoid it. And I think that's a simple question to ask yourself. Where do I get my caffeine? Is it coffee? Is it soda? And is that really obvious? Is it like the coffee sitting right out on the counter? Is the soda like the first thing I see at eye level when I open the fridge? And how can I make it less obvious? In Atomic Habits, there are kind of what I call the 4 laws of behavior change. And it's just this big picture view of how to build a good habit. And so if you want to build a good habit, you want to make your habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. And if you want to break a bad habit, you just do the opposite of those 4. So you want to make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, and make it unsatisfying.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5 is use the 4 laws of behavior change.
Can you give me a practical application of that? If we just walked through any habit, doesn't matter, I want to establish. Can you give me a practical application of that, a strategic application of how I would do it?
Sure. So once we have those 4 stages, I like to try to operationalize it. How do we make this actionable? How do we apply it to a habit like you're asking? And to do that, I've come up with what I call the 4 laws of behavior change. And so there's 1 law for each stage. And if you follow these, they give you kind of like a high level framework for building a good habit or breaking a bad one. So from a high level, the 4 laws are: the first law is to make it obvious. You want the cues of your good habits to be obvious, available, visible, easy to see. Easier it is for it to get your attention, the more likely you are to act on it. Second law is to make it attractive. So again, this one connects to the craving, right? The more attractive or appealing or exciting or enticing a habit is, the more likely you are to perform it. The third law is to make it easy. The easier, more convenient, frictionless, simple a habit is, the more likely you are to do it. We've already talked a little bit about that. The 2-minute rule is an example of making it easy. And then the 4th law is to make it satisfying. The more satisfying or enjoyable or rewarding or pleasurable a habit is, the more likely you are to repeat it. So those 4 laws: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. They give you a high level framework for building a habit. If you're ever not sure what to do, if you say, how can I make this more habitual, or how can I, do a better job of doing this consistently? You can just go through those 4 and ask yourself, how can I make it obvious? How can I make it more attractive? How can I make it easier? How can I make it more satisfying? And you'll start to find opportunities to do those things. And of course, the whole book is organized around sharing different strategies for doing that. Let me just give you a couple personal examples so you can see how this might be applied. When the pandemic started, I knew that I was going to want to start. I wasn't going to have to be driving or traveling as much. So I wanted to spend some of that time I was spending traveling previously, that I wanted to use it productively and read more. So I opened up my phone and I downloaded Audible for audiobooks, and I moved the app to the first screen on my phone. I moved all the other apps to the second screen. So the only thing I saw when I opened my phone up was Audible. Now, that's a very small thing, does not radically transform your behavior, but it was a way of making reading more obvious, right? So that's the first law, making it obvious. Let me get it in front of me. I also sprinkled books kind of around the house or on my desk. Like I have 3 on my desk right now. I have a couple, by the bed. I've got a couple in the living room. And the point for me was I never wanted to be far from a good idea. Like I always wanted to be kind of surrounded by something that was interesting or useful to read. And odds are it's more likely that I pick it up and take a look at it. On the flip side, this also applies, this first law of making it obvious. It also applies to many of the bad habits that we have. So, for example, a lot of people feel like they watch too much television, but walk into any living room. Where do all the couches and chairs face? It's like, what is this room designed to get you to do? Wow. And so I think the question that you can ask yourself for this first law on making your habits obvious is, what does this space encourage? Right? What behavior is encouraged in this area? And you want to design your life, design the spaces that you live and work in to encourage the good habits and discourage the bad ones, to make the path of least resistance or the obvious choice, the good habit. So the healthy food is on the counter, not the junk food. Books are around you, not the TV remote, and so on and so forth. And no individual choice like that is going to radically transform things, but you can see how making a dozen or 2 dozen or 50 little tweaks like that, now all of a sudden you're living in a space that always is kind of like nudging you toward the more productive behavior.
Rule number 6 is make better decisions.
What are some of the common reasons why we struggle with decision making?
All kinds of things that can influence it. There's all sorts of biases that we have, like confirmation bias, for example, is probably like one of the most predominant ones, where you're just sort of searching for evidence that supports what you already want to do rather than trying to find the truth or figure out the best way to do it. I think one mindset that's good to counter that is telling yourself, I don't care about being right. I care about getting it right. I don't need to be the one who comes up with the correct idea as long as we get it correct in the long run. And maybe that gives you a chance to check your ego a little bit and search a little more widely for a solution rather than just hoping that you'll feel good about the process. So, being wrong, nobody likes being wrong. Like being wrong is not going to feel good. But if you're wrong in service of getting it right in the long run, then, who cares? That's fine. So I think there are all kinds of biases like that. But generally, when I think about decision making and trying to make better choices, what does it mean to make a good choice? It doesn't necessarily mean that you get the result that you want. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're always right. I think what it means is that you are continually improving your position. So a good choice is one that puts you in a better position for the next cycle, the next round, the uncertain future.
Rule number 7 is develop a pre-game ritual.
The frameworks and principles in Atomic Habits, are there any sections, chapters, principles, anything that you wish more people paid attention to? Right? There's something that you put in that gets glossed over or maybe doesn't stick for whatever reason as much as other things, but you think it or these things are important.
Well, sometimes you might just be like, maybe I thought that idea was better than it actually was,
There might be that too. There might be that.
Yeah, I have a couple. So there are 2 things that came to mind. The first one is there's a little example I give in the book about halfway through or 40% through, where I talk about having a pregame routine and kind of doing things in the same sequence each time, in the same order each time. And that helps get you in the mindset and kind of initiate the habit. So I played baseball through college and I have the same pregame routine that I did before each game. And that kind of like flips this switch in your mind where it's like, hey, like it's time to compete now, like it's game mode. Or the example I gave in the book was this guy who he would do his writing at the library and he would go to the library, sit at the same desk each day and put on his headphones and play the same playlist. And that little sequence was a pregame routine that got him in the mindset to do his writing habit. And one day he turned around and realized that no music was playing. He just had his headphones on and it was just silent, but he was writing. And he was like 20 minutes into writing before he realized it. And it's a good example of how like just that sequence of doing it the same way each time and having that same pregame routine, that little ritual, got him in the mindset. He didn't even need to press play that day. He was just ready to write. And so if you can come up with what that little pregame ritual is for you, that can be a great way to initiate a habit. And I don't usually see people talk about that. I think actually I've heard some examples like this. on your podcast previously, Tim, like I think when you talked to Josh Waitzkin at one point, he at some time he gave this example, maybe it was in his books, maybe it was a conversation with you, where he was competing in this national competition, martial arts, and he was told that he was going to compete at one time, and they came up to him and he was like sleeping or laying on a bench, and they were like, "Hey, sorry, the timing was wrong. You're actually up in like 6 minutes." And he was like, normally I would have been thrown off, but he had this little pregame ritual that he did. And he tried to, as he developed it over time, it started out, maybe it was 10 minutes, and then he tried to compress it. So it was 7 minutes, and then it was 3 minutes. And then eventually got it down to where his little ritual was just something he did for like 30 seconds. So they woke him up on that bench and he's got to compete 6 minutes later, but all he needed was 30 seconds to kind of like get in the right frame of mind. And he was like, okay, now I'm ready to go. And so those pregame rituals can be really powerful if you make it your own and come up with something that like you do every time and it helps get you into the mindset to compete or to perform.
Rule number 8 is embrace failure.
One of the things we often talk about on the podcast is we embrace failure. Failure is where the learning happens, but it's about getting smart quickly as well. Would you tell us a little bit more about that philosophy and why it's so important?
Sure. Well, first, just a little point on your thought about embracing failure. I feel like this is something you hear from a lot of people who talk about, especially like Silicon Valley startup culture, failure is almost praised, like, things like that. And there is an element of truth to it. I don't think that you should be scared of failing because then that prevents you from reaching, that prevents you from trying. But I also think there's kind of an opposite side or another side of the coin that's important to emphasize, which is you're never trying to fail. Like that's not the objective, just because it's not like we're okay with it in the sense that, oh, it's fine. Like I didn't get the result I wanted, that let's just stick with that. I am in fact trying to do my best every time. I am in fact trying to figure out a solution that works. I am in fact trying to get an exceptional result. Failure is never the objective, but I'm not scared of it. Like it's not going to prevent me from trying. Yeah. And in fact, I would say that actually many people, their fear of failure or their fear of how they'll be judged or what other people might think or whether it will appear impressive enough for, what they're hoping to instill on the people around them. That general fear, that worry, whatever form it takes, it ends up becoming like a brake. And it like stops the car. It prevents you from moving forward. And my encouragement is to say, listen, let fear be the gas pedal, not the brake. And so I have all those same fears. I'm worried about what the people who know me well will think of the next project I'm going to create. When I started writing, this is even to this day, I still have never shared an article that I wrote on my personal Facebook page with like all the people who knew me from high school or college or things like that. And why is that? Well, now at this point, it's because who cares and I don't use Facebook anymore. But in the beginning, it was because I was worried about what they would think. I was worried that they would look at it and be like, oh, look at this dumb little blog this guy has. And instead of letting
that sense of belonging was powerful there then.
Oh, for sure. It's powerful. Yeah, it's powerful for all of us. We all want to belong. Yeah. That's one of the deepest needs that we all have. This is why those trade-offs are hard to manage because we all do want to fit in. We all want to connect. And also, sometimes people will say things like, well, don't care what other people think of you. It can be useful in a context, but there's a very good reason why we care about what other people think of us, which is it tends to serve you very well when people think well of you. It's very beneficial to have friends, to have support. Not only does it feel good, it also provides you opportunities. It provides you love and affection. It provides you support in your life that you need. So to care what other people think about you is like perhaps the most natural thing in the world to do. The question is not whether to care, it's just when to care. So anyway, all of that to say, rather than letting my worries about what other people think of me prevent me from writing or prevent me from creating, instead, I just used it as fuel to say, okay, listen, you just need to get to work now. You need to put even more effort into this so that you can make it truly great, so you can create something that you're proud of. And if you use it as the gas pedal and not the brake, then it becomes a driver of creative output rather than a hindrance for it.
Rule number 9 is learn to say no.
Talk about that a little bit. Like, you want to be more productive. This article, by the way, guys, Google it. It's so good. It actually teaches you how to say no as well in the article. But are you good at this, or did you write it for your own benefit?
Well, pretty much everything I write is a reminder to myself of what I should be doing. So no, it's not that I'm great at it. It's that I'm trying to learn to be better at it. I felt this very acutely after Atomic Habits came out. And over the course of the first like 3 months that it was out, I was doing okay. And then the book really started to take off, and I was constantly feeling like I'm a very slow learner and that I should have been upgrading the level at which I was saying no to things. And I was always like 2 or 3 months behind. I was always on the hook for more stuff than I should have been. And it was because I was saying yes to too many things. And there's this weird dynamic where success starts to eat itself. So the thing that was getting me all of these opportunities is because I was focused and I wrote a good book. And because of that, people were very interested in talking to me or sharing these new ideas. And like, there's all these interesting new opportunities that come your way. You know, do you want to speak at this thing? Or what about these TV rights? Or how about this interesting opportunity? Or would you like to come to this, cool conference or retreat or whatever? And individually, each of them sounds really fun and interesting. But collectively, if you start to say yes to all those things, you don't have any more time to do the thing that got you those opportunities in the first place, which is thinking clearly and writing a good book. And so success like eats itself. All these new opportunities come in and they squeeze out the thing that you were good at in the first place. So it's I don't know. The other thing that's difficult about it, and I still, I'm close enough to the beginning of my career that I can still appreciate this and feel this. For the first decade of my career, I was trying to say yes to everything. I was trying to capitalize on every opportunity so that I would have the chance now to say no to basically everything because you got a bunch of stuff coming your way. So at first it's like outbound and you're trying to like capitalize on every opportunity you can. And then there's this like rapid switch where now all of a sudden everything's inbound and you have to put up a tight filter. And that can be a difficult lesson to learn.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is show up consistently.
What is the best first step you found when you share this with people, with leaders, to make better decisions, to start those habits? What's the thing that's the stickiest where people go, oh my gosh, yes, I can do that?
If you just want something really tactical, just a very specific way to kickstart a habit, I like to recommend the 2-minute rule. So it's very simple. It just says take whatever habit you're trying to build and scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. And sometimes people resist this a little bit. They're like, okay, buddy, I know the real goal isn't just to take my yoga mat out. I know I'm actually trying to do the workout, so this is some kind of mental trick and I know it's a trick, then why would I fall for it, basically? And I get where people are coming from, but I have this reader, his name's Mitch. I mentioned him in Atomic Habits, and he lost over 100 pounds. He's kept it off for more than a decade. But when he first started going to the gym, he had this strange little rule for himself where he wouldn't stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he'd get in the car, drive to the gym, get out, do half an exercise, get back in the car, drive home. And it sounds ridiculous. It sounds silly. You're like, clearly this is not going to work for the guy. But if you take a step back, what you realize is he was mastering the art of showing up. He was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And I think that's a deep truth about habits. It's something people often overlook, which is a habit must be established before it can be improved. It has to become the standard in your life or in your business before you can scale it up and optimize it and turn it into something more. Standardize before you optimize. And so I think that the 2-minute rule kind of pushes back on that perfectionist tendency. Just execute a little bit, execute in a small way, get some proof, get some evidence, become the type of person or the type of business that does this consistently, even if it's smaller than what you ultimately hope to do. And then from that new foothold that you've established, you can advance and optimize and improve from there. Once you're showing up, there are almost endless opportunities for improvement. But you can have the best plan possible, and if you can't get yourself to show up consistently, it doesn't really matter. So the 2-minute rule is perhaps a good place to start.
If you take a bad habit or an unhealthy habit, like eating a donut or something, the immediate outcome is favorable. It's sugary, it's tasty, it's enjoyable in the moment. That's how it serves you. That's the reason why you repeat it. The ultimate outcome, if you repeat that every day for the next 3 months or year or whatever, is you end up gaining weight or you're less healthy or so on. For good habits, it's often the reverse, right? Like sometimes, the benefit of going to the gym in many people's eyes is the immediate outcome is unfavorable. Sweat, I have to work, it's effortful, it's hard, I need to sacrifice. I don't get to watch TV, I got to go there instead. So the immediate outcome is unfavorable. The ultimate outcome, if you repeat that habit for 2 months or a year or whatever, is you're fit and healthy. And this is one of the key challenges of building good habits and breaking bad ones, is figuring out ways to take the long-term consequences of your good habits or of your bad habits and pull them into the present moment. So you feel a little bit of the pain right now, so it serves you less. And to take the long-term rewards of your good habits and pull those into the present moment, so it feels good. And this is one reason why, it's great to choose, like, what's the best form of exercise? Well, maybe it's the one that you enjoy, because if it feels good in the moment, now it serves you and you have a reason to repeat it.
This is one of the most common, criticisms or complaints that people ask me about with habits is like, well, I don't want to be robotic, right? Like, what about like spontaneity? What about the, freedom and doing what I want? I don't want to like pigeonhole myself in this lifestyle. But it's this false dichotomy, because habits don't restrict freedom, they create it. It's often the people who have the worst habits that have the least amount of freedom. It's the people who have terrible financial habits that are always wondering like where the next dollar will come from. Or it's the people who have poor learning habits that are always feeling like they're behind the curve. Or people who have poor fitness habits that are always struggling to find energy. But on the other hand, if you have your habits dialed in, if you have your fitness habits figured out, if you've got your finances handled, then you actually have way more freedom than you did before. Now you actually have the space you have the energy to do what you want. You have the strength to do what you want. You have the financial ability to spend time in areas that you want. And all of that comes from getting your habits handled. So it is a little counterintuitive, this idea that like discipline equals freedom or habits do not restrict freedom, they create it. But it's true that if you can handle that stuff, if the fundamentals of life are dialed in, then you've got space for spontaneity and creativity and freedom and all the other stuff.
The process of change usually starts with self-awareness. Now, you can change without being aware of it, but you're not usually in control. It means that the environment shifted or the circumstance or situation changed and you changed in response, but you weren't really influencing it in any meaningful way. So it starts with self-awareness. Then the next step, which you already mentioned, is we could call it different things, call it deliberate practice, call it routine or, whatever, but you're consciously doing the behavior. So you're putting an effort to practice it.
Just to stop you there, is there any tricks, that you have found as far as that part of it, because people don't get started, they have too high of goals. I've heard a ton of different ones, but could you share with us, some tips on that part of it?
So I think there are a couple, maybe two, let's pick two strategies that you could use right away. So the first one is a lot of people feel like they lack motivation when what they really lack is clarity. And what I mean by that is they think, I need more willpower, I need more motivation, I need more persistence, I need more drive. And certainly, those are all important qualities in life. But the truth is we often make statements about how we want to change in very vague ways. We say something like, this time it'll be different, I'll just eat better, I'm going to try harder, whatever. And instead, if we have clarity, and you could use, there are two strategies in the book that I talk about for this. One is implementation intentions. So it is a intention to implement a particular behavior. So the simplest way to do this is you fill out a sentence that says exactly when and where the behavior will occur. So I will go to the gym on Monday at 5 p.m. at this address, or I will journal at this coffee shop at 6 a.m., blah, blah, blah. And the more clear that plan is, the more likely you are to follow through. And there's a bunch of research studies that show that people are more likely to get their flu shot, quit smoking, recycle, exercise, basically any kind of habit you can think of.
Just take someone who's trying to get in shape. I mean, people will... What kind of protein powder should I get? What knee sleeves do I need? What are the best weightlifting shoes? And all that stuff is like the last 2% of difference. It's mostly like, don't miss workouts and get your reps in. This is what in the book I call the difference between motion and action. Action can actually deliver a result, but motion is related to that, but never will. Like going to the gym and talking to a personal trainer about signing up. That's fine. That's related to getting in shape, but it doesn't matter how many times you talk to a personal trainer, you're never going to get in shape. Mm-hmm. Whereas like doing 10 squats, that actually can do something. It's like Talking to the trainer is motion. Doing squats is action.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think a lot of times people get trapped in motion. They get trapped in analysis paralysis because it is a way to feel like you're making progress without running the risk of failure. Every day, I try to leave my phone in another room outside of my office, at least until lunch, because then I get like a 4-hour block of time in the morning where I can just work without any distraction.
Yeah.
And it's funny how quickly you don't, like, if my phone was on me in the morning, I would check it like, every 5 minutes or whatever. But when it's out of the room, I don't even find myself wanting to, I never walk up the stairs to go check it, even though it's only 30 seconds away.
Wow.
So it's interesting how little we actually want to do these things, but we just do them all the time because they're obvious and easy. And I think the key is to invert that. Take the things that are the bad habits, the distractions, the procrastinations, the unproductive uses of time, and make them more invisible, reduce exposure, and less easy to do. And take the things that are good habits and make it the equivalent of having your phone on you all the time, right? Make it right in front of you, make it obvious, make it easy, make it frictionless. Let's say that you wanted to build a better. I'll give you an example of breaking a good habit or building a good habit and breaking a bad one. So one of the laws is to make it obvious, and this largely comes down to like what we're exposed to each day. And minimalism and simplicity plays a big role in this. In the book, I call it environment design. That's basically the strategy. So for a long time, I realized that I brushed my teeth twice a day, but I didn't floss consistently. And when I looked at that habit, one of the reasons that I wasn't flossing consistently is because the floss was hidden in the drawer in the bathroom. So I just wouldn't see it, like I wouldn't open up the drawer and remember. So I bought a little bowl and got some of the pre-made flossers and put them in the bowl and placed it right next to my toothbrush. So now I brush my teeth, put the toothbrush down, pick the flosser up, it's right there. Just that one little environment design change is pretty much all I needed to do to build the habit of flossing every day. On the other side, let's say, a lot of people feel like they spend too much time watching TV or playing video games or just looking at a screen. But if you walk into pretty much any living room, where do all the couches and chairs face? They all face the television. So it's like, what is that room designed to get you to do? It's designed to get you to watch TV. So there are a variety of levels to this. You could, for example, take the remote and take it off of the coffee table and put it inside a drawer. Or you could take the television and put it inside like a wall unit or a cabinet so that you don't see it. You could also increase the friction of the task. So you could like take the batteries out of the remote after each use, and then it's an extra 5 or 10 seconds to put it in. Maybe that's just enough time for you to think, do I really want to watch something, or am I just doing this mindlessly? You could unplug the TV after each individual use and then only plug it in if you can say the name of the show you want to watch, so you can't like mindlessly browse on Netflix. And I mean, if you really wanted to be extreme about it, you could take the TV off the wall, put it in the closet, and then only take it out when you really wanted to watch something. But the point here, and this is kind of the principle of environment design in general, which is you want to put fewer steps between you and the good behaviors and more steps between you and the bad ones. And imagine the cumulative impact of living in an environment that exposes you to the cues of your positive habits and reduces the cues of your negative habits. It's kind of like you're just gently being nudged in the right direction each day. And that's just one of the ways that you can sort of design a system that leads you into better habits. I've worked with this really great powerlifting coach for the last couple months, and it's been great. My programming's been more dialed in. I've had somebody who can pay attention to all the little mistakes that I'm making that I would otherwise overlook. And I've made progress, and that's been nice. But after training for a decade now, what I've realized is that the biggest thing is just get in the gym and don't miss reps. Like put your reps in. If you do that, then the actual program that you're on, it might help you a little bit in the short run. And maybe if it's really dialed in, you got a great coach, then it could help you in the long run too, a little bit. Maybe your peak would be a little higher. But if you just put your reps in and don't miss workouts, and you do that for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, I don't know, how far would you get as long as you're doing a reasonable program? Probably pretty far. Even if you don't have the best coach, you probably get 95% of your potential out. And I think a lot of times, this is true not just for habits, but like any kind of endeavor that people go into, they try to optimize the things that make like the last 2% of difference. Like people want to get in shape and they're like, what knee sleeves do I need? What's the best protein powder? What workout shoes should I buy? What running
Olympic shoes should I
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, dude, just don't miss workouts for 2 years and then get back to me. I mean, that's the thing that makes 98% of the difference is, are you putting your reps in? What really changes your outcomes, or what really moves your life in a positive direction, is not a single 1% change or a single little habit. It's a collection of them all organized towards the same overall goal or overall outcome. So, sometimes people they get a Fitbit and they get a Fitbit and they start walking 10,000 steps a day or something like that. And then they get frustrated after 3 months because they haven't seen this change in the mirror, or this change on the scale or whatever. But it's well, that's good, but that's just one habit related to your health. You don't need a single little habit. You need 1,000 of them. And once you kind of build this collection of them all moving you in the same direction, it's kind of like each one adds a little grain of sand to the side of the scale, and eventually you tip the scales in your favor. And I think that's another reason to start with one habit at a time, is that you naturally sort of pick up other behaviors that are related to the overall thing that you're working on in the moment. And that helps keep you focused rather than trying to do 2 or 3 things and then you get scattered. The first stage of every habit is a cue. The second stage is a craving or some kind of prediction that your brain makes. I'll give you an example of these in a second. The third stage is the response, and then the fourth stage is the reward. So you walk into the question I had that no model I could find could solve in any good way or explain in any good way was, why can the same person respond to the same cue in a different way? So let's say you get into the habit of going to the gym at 5 o'clock every day, but then sometimes work gets busy and you don't go to the gym at 5 o'clock. Current models don't explain that very well, because it's well, the cue is 5, you should be going to the gym right now. It says the routine follows automatically after the cue. Or why does someone walk into the kitchen and see a plate of cookies and then they automatically want to eat it? But you could just as easily imagine that you just got done eating dinner in the other room and you're stuffed and you're full, and you walk in and you see a plate of cookies and you're like, I'm stuffed, I don't want to eat anything. So what's going on there? And I think these 4 stages explain it, which is you see the cue or you experience a cue, and then your craving or your prediction differs based on your current state. So the way that you interpret the cues in your life is contingent upon the current state that you're in.
The way you're feeling.
Right. And also other things like your beliefs or your identity, the social group that you're part of, right? So if you're in a different group, then maybe you interpret things in a different way. You could imagine one group, they practice a particular religion, they walk into a butcher shop and see pork and they're like, oh, we can't eat that.
Right.
Another person walks in and they're like, oh yeah, I'll have a pork sandwich because it's obvious and easy and right there. So what you choose is contingent upon how you interpret the cues in your life.
In a sense, you could say that every behavior is driven by the desire for a change in state. And so when you smoke a cigarette or eat a bag of Doritos or pick up your phone, what you really want is not the nicotine or the calories from the Doritos or the likes on social media. What you want is to feel less anxious or to feel approved or to not be bored anymore. So it's really the desire to change that state that you're in that motivates you to act. And the behavior, and in many cases, a lot of our modern technology is an example of this. We didn't evolve. You didn't come out of the womb with a desire to check Instagram, right? There's nothing evolutionarily wired there. It's just a modern manifestation of an ancient desire to gain respect and approval, or to not be abandoned by the tribe, or to feel approved in some capacity. And so we kind of have those deeper primal drives. And then the secondary layer on top of it is just the modern manifestation of that behavior and how we're resolving it in the moment.
I divide a habit into 4 different stages. And so just from a high level, those stages are cue, craving, response, and reward. So the cue is something that gets your attention, like you see a plate of cookies on the counter. That's a visual cue. Or the ambulance comes behind you on the street and you hear it, and so you pull to the side of the road. That's an auditory cue. Or your phone buzzes in your pocket. That's a physical or tactile cue. And so it can be any of the senses, but usually it tends to be visual. Humans are very visual creatures, so that tends to be the most predominant sense. But the cue gets your attention. The second step is the craving, which is dependent on how you interpret the cue. So whether you get a craving or the motivation to act, whether you predict that it would be useful to take a response, depends on the meaning that you assign to the cue. So if you have 2 people who walk into a living room and they see a pack of cigarettes sitting on the table, The first person might, they've been a smoker for 10 years and they see it and they get this craving of, oh, I want to pick a cigarette up and smoke. So they interpret that visual cue as favorable. The second person has never smoked a day in their life. And so they see the cigarettes and they just think, oh, it's just a pack of cigarettes, and they move on. And so it's really about the meaning that you assign to that visual cue that determines whether you act on it or not. Then there's the response. And finally, the response is the actual habit or action itself. And then finally, there's the reward or the outcome. So visual cue, you see a plate of cookies on the counter. Craving, you interpret them as favorable. You predict, oh, that'll be sweet, sugary, tasty. So you response, grab one, take a bite. And then finally, the reward. And the reward serves two purposes. The first is it satisfies the craving that came before the action. So you predicted that the cookie would be tasty and sweet. And once you take a bite, it is, in fact, sugary, tasty, sweet. So that resolves that craving. And then the second thing that it does is it teaches your brain what to repeat for next time. Because when actions are followed by a feeling of pleasure, when it's enjoyable, or you solved the problem you were facing, or you had some kind of successful feeling at the end of the habit, it feels good. And your brain's like, hey, that was enjoyable. I should do this again next time when I'm in a similar circumstance. And so it's actually closing the feedback loop and training your brain what to do again and again. And once you've done something enough times and gotten the outcome that you hoped from it again and again and again, the feedback loop gets really tight and you can do it pretty much on autopilot. You don't even really think about it. You're just sort of automatically, whenever you put a shoe on and see a shoe untied on your foot, that's the cue. And you know, oh, I just go ahead and tie the shoe. And that's how I get this reward that I'm looking for of having a shoe securely on my foot and so on.
It's this idea between the system and the goal. And, like say you're playing a sport. In every sport, the goal is to have the best score on the scoreboard at the end of the game. But it would be ridiculous to spend all game looking at the scoreboard because it wouldn't help you in any way. So in fact, if you just ignored the score the entire time and just focused on a better process or playing a better way or a better scheme or strategy, then you probably would end up with the best score. I think Bill Walsh, he was the Super Bowl winning head coach for the San Francisco 49ers. He had this quote. It was like, the score takes care of itself. And that I think that probably applies to a lot of tracking and measurement.
The reason a lot of people struggle with that conscious activity is that they pick things that are too big in the beginning.
Right. So I call lower the bar.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the 2-minute rule helps you lower the bar by saying a new habit is something that should take less than 2 minutes to do. So you take whatever habit you're trying to build, whatever ambitious plan you have, read 40 books a year becomes read one page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. And sometimes people resist this a little bit when I say it first because they think, all right, well, I know the real goal isn't just to take my yoga mat out. I know I actually want to do the workout. And if I know that, and it's like this mental trick, and I know it's a trick, why would I fall for it? And so my suggestion, if you feel that way, is force yourself for the first few days to only do it for 2 minutes.
There are a couple ways to think about it, but I would say just quick definition. A habit is a behavior that has been repeated enough times to be performed more or less automatically. So you can do it pretty much on autopilot. But another way to think about it, and I think this is a useful way to define a habit, is that as you go through life, you face different problems. And some of those problems are big and some of them are small, like you need to tie your shoes. And whenever you face a problem, your brain starts looking for solutions to that. And as you come across solutions to the recurring problems in life, you start to automate those. And so every morning you wake up and you put your shoes on and you got this little problem that you need to solve. And pretty soon, after you tie your shoes 100 times or 500 times or 1,000 times, you can do it pretty much without thinking. And so that's another way of thinking about habits, is that they're kind of these like automatic solutions we fall into for whatever the recurring problems are we face.
Right. Behavior that becomes habituated.
Yeah. And, the interesting thing about this is you don't necessarily have to have the same habit to solve a recurring problem. Like if you come home from work each day and you feel stressed and exhausted, one person might play video games for an hour, and that's a way to resolve that problem. So they get in the habit of doing it, and they just walk over to the controller. They don't even think about it. Another person might go for a run for 20 minutes or meditate for 10 minutes. A third person might smoke a cigarette. And all of those are just solutions to that problem that you're facing. And that, I think, is another powerful lesson, is that your original habit is not necessarily the optimal one. And once you realize that, then it kind of becomes your responsibility to become a little more aware of what those habits are and then think about, can you shape them or design them?
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag Believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Brendan Burchard, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
The habits that everyone wants to talk about in the popular literature or books is like, these small habits or atomic habits or automatic habits or unconscious habits. Those are valuable. Those are very important. But high performance requires deliberate habits. A deliberate habit means